Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstad, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, Seahawks fans. Welcome back into another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with Keith Myers. Good afternoon, Keith. It's Thursday. Welcome into the show.
Yeah, it's Thursday afternoon. It's nice out. Yeah, there's football to talk about. It's gonna be a fun weekend of championship games.
Yeah, that'll be crazy. Nowhere near the match, I think, that we had last weekend, since there's only two games.
Last weekend was such epic. Yeah.
Right. And so this weekend will be fun and interesting. Who do you got in the NFC? Two familiar foes.
The Rams. Definitely got the Rams.
Yeah.
That
makes complete sense on paper, right?
They're the better, more talented team, but the whole Shanahan over McVay angle, it makes that game way closer than it should be.
I really just love the idea of the Bengals being in the AFC Championship game, and that's, and my question is that enough for them too, just being there, or do they really want to go and try to get this game? I think Joe Burrow has them convinced that they've got a shot. He just seems like one of those quarterbacks that's going to make his team show up no matter what.
Yeah, and the thing is, that team is young, it's hungry, it's talented. They can go out and win this. They already beat the Chiefs earlier in the year, but it was when the Chiefs were struggling a bit.
Around. Yep.
But they can, and a lot of that starts up, with their quarterback. But I still think that they're in a position this offseason to continue to upgrade that roster and come back next year as a massive force. They have exceeded expectations this year, because I still thought they were building and a year away. But they could definitely, pull off that, get the win, and honestly, they're capable of beating any of the teams that are still in this. So
I know
it's not right? They get into the Super Bowl, but then they're not going to stand a chance.
I would say, no, just thinking out loud here, that if Cincinnati gets into the Super Bowl, which seems unlikely, but you know what, it's playoff football. If they get in, I look at their matchup against either one of the NFC West teams, the Rams or the 49ers, and I'm thinking, that's going to be a darn good, entertaining football game, no matter which opponent it is. And it'll just be fun. I think it's good for the game. I like Joe Burrow. I like your idea, your thought process of being a year away. It seems like that's the way it is, but he's got them playing on a completely different level right now, even from 6 weeks ago. He's got that winner mentality, and just certain guys have it. You can just see it, and he's got it, whatever that intangible thing is, as a leader, and he's got them believing already, and I'm here for it. That's pretty awesome. Today, Keith, we came in, we kind of scheduled this show to kind of be at the end of the week, so thinking that maybe we would have some coaching news possibly to talk about with the Seattle Seahawks after Ken Norton Jr. was let go 10 days ago now, Keith. 10 days. I was looking at the calendar from the previous year when we made the coaching change at offensive coordinator, and that was 14 days from the time that Brian Schottenheimer was fired to the time that our new offensive coordinator was hired. So we're right in that window now where things start to change. And I thought this morning, waking up and hearing about a few head coaching changes happening, some hires today. So that process is now starting. And it seems like those things kind of go hand in hand a little bit when head coaches starting to come off the board, defensive coordinators, offensive coordinators, that movement really starts to happen as well.
Yeah. It's, I kind of thought this would be, that spot, but I think one of the things is that you've got good defensive coordinators that are currently under contract, because if they're under contract for a multi-year deal, they can't move laterally, and so if they're waiting for a head coach to be hired, so that way, in order for them to get let go, so they could go get another job, because that happens, right? Because then it gives the incoming head coach a chance to come in, interview the guys that are currently on staff, decide if they want to keep any of them before replacing them. So they end up in this limbo while they wait for positions to be filled, and so it takes a little longer. And especially this year where we just had our eighth. Or was it our ninth coaching vacancy with
right.
With the Saints job opening up. So it's an interesting year, and honestly, I think they take their time and they see what happens.
So speaking of Nathaniel Hackett over at the Green Bay Packers previously, offensive coordinator there, signed up with the Denver Broncos to be their head coach. He was in the process, I think, last year of being evaluated for head coaching positions, had his first interviews and so forth last year. This year, he was deemed ready to go. Broncos got their guy there. I think their first choice, because I think he was ready to interview as well with the Panthers if he didn't take this job. And so they kind of jumped on him there. The Bears signed Matt Eberflus, former defensive coordinator for the Colts. That's an interesting hire. I'm not hearing a lot of positive or negative things out of the Bears camp on this particular one. Do you have any opinion at all on those two hires? With
Eberflus, he wasn't a guy whose name was coming up. But when the Colts defense wasn't good before they got him, they've been, the strength of that team since they did. So I think there's some stuff going on there, and everyone loved their GM hire, and the GM hire was the guy that wanted Eberflus. So
yeah, because Dan Cohen was in the building for a long time, like over a couple days and 3 different things, and and I thought for sure, like I not tweeted, but I texted you this morning that I thought that was a done deal. And
anytime
it was not.
You bring someone back for their third interview, that
you figure they're just talking about money.
Yeah, and I think that's what it ended
or
up
coaches
being,
or whatever it was. Yeah.
He's a guy who has head coaching experience. He took a team to the Super Bowl. He's asking for more money.
He's asking for $8 or $10 million, and a guy like Eberflus is probably looking at 4
or 3. Or maybe 2.5. And so, and that's might be it, is that basically I
don't understand that thinking, honestly, because you look at the situation, you've got a new up and coming quarterback, you've got a team and a roster that a lot of people feel that wasn't too many parts away from being somewhat in contention. And you go out and you do something like this, it really frustrates the fan base, and you point to Seattle as an alternative, when Seattle was in their coaching hunt and Pete Carroll we weren't even thinking about a change, and that the ownership went out and made that change and that hire, and then have continued to invest in the head coach over a long period of time. And a lot of times that's the difference. You look at the same thing with Belichick, the same thing there in Kansas City.
Mike Tomlin, Andy Reid in Kansas City.
Right. So you're paying these guys. There's no salary cap on these guys. So, that really kind of points directly to the philosophy of the ownership of the team there as being one of the primary problems that they may have in the future. I'm not saying it's a complete problem or saying that Matt's not going to win there. I'm just saying they've chosen on purpose not to invest in probably a more qualified coach.
See, I wouldn't have hired either of those guys in Chicago. Not that they aren't good head coaching.
Would you have done an offensive mind for their quarterback?
Yeah, because if you've got Justin Fields and you want to turn him into an elite quarterback, you go get an offensive mind. You go get someone
Nathaniel Hackett.
Yeah, actually,
steal a guy directly from your own conference.
Division. I mean, Yeah, I mean that's actually who that would have been a great one, or someone from the Mike Shanahan coaching staff. Go get your offensive mind, your guy that can develop the quarterback, because you bring in a defensive coach like either the two guys the Bears were interested in, and they're gonna be like, okay, but this will work, but I'm gonna go get my offensive coordinator, whatever. And so they invest in that. But if the offense does well and the team, the whole situation does well, then that offensive coordinator that the defensive head coach brought in gets a head coaching job in a year or two, and you end up running different coordinators in around your young developing quarterback, and that's never a system that you want. You want stability for your young developing quarterback.
It's worked with other situations and other systems. But you bring up a unique challenge. If you're going to start from scratch, it would be easier to marry those up from the very beginning. All right. A couple other teams and names. Miami is rumored to be the front runner for Brian DeBall, and then Jacksonville, Brian Leftwich. You talked to me right before we push record that may not go down, and they be switching directions here. Recording, he was reportedly kind of the front runner there.
Well, yeah, I mean they want him, but he doesn't want to coach for Trent Baalke, and so. What I was hearing on the way home today was that he's like, yeah, sure, I'll come coach for you, but you're going to have to find a new general manager because.
Yeah, that's a hard one for a team to do.
I saw what Trent Baalke did in San Francisco, and that was take a really good team and tear it apart and turn it into a mess. And he's like, and I'm not going to sign up for that. So.
Yeah, and he's not wrong. He's not wrong.
No, he's not wrong. I mean, Trent Baalke was terrible there, and had influence on getting, creating the mess that's in Jacksonville now. Like, I don't get why he would be hired at all in a decision making position given his track record. But there it is. But if you're a guy like Byron Leftwich, you're young, you've had a lot of success. You're like, if it doesn't come around this coaching cycle, it'll come around next year. So I'm not taking a job and going and working for a guy that's not going to be able to put talent on the field. And then I will get blamed for the terrible roster that I was forced to coach. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so he's just like, I don't need this.
So on the Seahawks front, since Ken Norton was let go, Andre Curtis, passing game coordinator, was let go. Nothing's really happened. We heard initially 4 names almost within a day or so of each other being mentioned as guys that this team had either sought permission to interview or had been linked to. I'm just going to go through those again, and I want to see if your opinion has kind of focused on one or two of these. Defensive line coach Clint Hurt is still there, also up for the DC position at the University of Miami under Mario Cristobal. They may be waiting for his decision there for Cristobal to kind of have it go that way, but it sounds like he's changing one way or another this year. Ed Donatel at Denver. Now that Nathaniel Hackett is in there, that makes Ed Donatel a guy that can be on the move. And he's rumored also to be part of that Jacksonville equation as for head coach, as well as being linked to Pete Carroll as a DC. Dallas secondary coach Joe Witt Jr., passing game coordinator, defensive backs coach, was requested to be interviewed and did interview for this position with the Seattle Seahawks. But now that Dan Quinn is out of the equation for Chicago and a few other teams, Dan has announced that he is going back to being the defensive coordinator for the Dallas Cowboys, which possibly means possibly that Joe Witt would go back, although he would probably take a promotion if it was going to be for a defensive coordinator job.
I think he would take a promotion. I think he was, if Quinn left, he was the guy that likely was going to take over as defensive coordinator. So he was looking at becoming a DC no matter what. And so I think if Quinn goes back, he's going to move on in order to get a defensive coordinator job.
All right. So, and then possibly Gus Bradley. We don't know about the Raiders job yet, but he may or may not be available out there. So out of those names, and I didn't mention Sean Desai, the Bears defensive coordinator, who's got a heck of a resume. If you're into like big college, big school, doctorates and thesis and all that kind of stuff, he's your man. But how do you feel about it?
Honestly, of all the names that are there, Gus Bradley is the most interesting one to me, because
that is wild, really.
Yeah, he was here in Seattle, did a great job. So
remind folks that haven't been with the team prior to 7 years ago.
Yeah, so he was hired to be defensive coordinator by Jim Mora Jr. In that one Jim Mora year when, that was terrible. He's a guy who is in the Monty Kiffin coaching tree. In fact, it was Monty Kiffin who called Pete Carroll and said, "Hey, you're heading there. Give this guy an interview before you make a decision about your defensive coordinator." And Pete Carroll did, and Pete Carroll decided to keep him on. And he was kind of the architect of moving Red Bryant to defensive end, and some of the other things that happened early in the Pete Carroll tenure on defense that led to, that defense just turning around.
The Legion of Boom, etc.
Yeah. He was a big part of that. Then he got hired as the head coach in Jacksonville and decided that Blake Bortles was his quarterback, and that was a mistake. And so he ended up never really getting that program turned around in Jacksonville. But as a defensive coordinator, he was good. And then when he moved on from there, he first went to the Chargers and instantly improved their defense. Then when they got a new coaching staff,
and you have a good memory.
Yeah. He instantly, or when they got a new coaching staff, he ended up moving on, ended up with the Raiders, and was a big part of the Raiders' success this year, especially after the Gruden fiasco mid-year. So great coach, knows Pete Carroll, knows the system, but also has been away from Pete Carroll in the system and done other things, seen other things, and is going to bring new ideas back to the system. In the same way that Dan Quinn left Seattle as when he was a defensive line coach, went to the University of Miami as a defensive coordinator before coming back to Seattle. It gave him an opportunity to see some things from a different point of view, from a different coaching philosophy, and bring more back with him. And I think that it's a situation that would be really nice for the Seahawks. They get the veteran leadership, they get a guy that knows what they want to do, but also all the new ideas and stuff that they're looking for.
Now, see, this is exactly why somebody needs to subscribe to this show. For that right there, that history lesson. I'd totally forgotten all about the San Diego gig for him. There was this hole of where was Gus Bradley for a while, and I just figured he popped up here at this latest job, and hadn't really been paying attention to his career. But yeah, interesting. So he's done well for himself. That would be interesting. I mean, I'm unfamiliar with who's on the radar for the Raiders. Gus Bradley would be a good guy that you would want to keep on that staff.
Especially if you're hiring an offensive coach.
Yes.
If you're bringing in, I still think Harbaugh's the best option for the Raiders. He would be perfect.
And
there.
that's been the kind of the coach that's been linked all along.
Yep. So if Harbaugh goes there, I mean, he is a guy that is an offensive mind,
and it would be a defense that he is familiar with. Yeah. As they run. Yeah, he kind of developed. They developed that same defense before Harbaugh left, right? Am I correct at San Francisco? That's not
true. Seattle, they went to that defense when
you're right.
When they brought in Shanahan and company there. That's when they made the shift from Harbaugh's defense into running in the Seattle system. So
okay. So, and I'm just curious of what your opinion of the Bears defensive coordinator, Sean Desai, is. just because I've heard a whole bunch of stuff about him that it was just fantastic. Young guy, up and coming, part of the Donatel tree. What was the other tree that you mentioned that Monty Kiffin? Isn't it the same
Monty Kiffin
thing?
Yeah. It is. They're just lower rungs on the same tree, or higher rungs, if you want to put it that way.
So Pete Carroll is really fairly intimately has knowledge about this guy. Obviously, he was on the short list.
He is on the Pete Carroll comes from the Monty Kiffin tree, and these other guys also. I mean, they came off the tree, branched off later, but they're. I don't know if our listeners know just how big Monty Kiffin is in NFL circles as a defensive coordinator and innovator. In the same way that Bill Parcells and the Mike Holmgren, those coaching trees
Belichick.
are off. Yeah, well, Belichick's part of the Bill Parcells coaching tree, but you know what I mean. Like as big as Bill Parcells and is as far as on the offensive side of things, Monty Kiffin is on the defensive side of things. He was never, as far to my memory, he was never a head coach, but he was the elite defensive coordinator that developed younger coaches into great defensive coordinators, and was the architect of the Tampa 2 and, all of the variants of that, and is generally regarded as perhaps the best defensive coordinator ever. And so, yeah, I mean, that, like I said, Pete Carroll comes from that coaching tree. He coached defensive backs under Monty Kiffin when Monty Kiffin was a defensive coordinator. So that fact that the guys that Seahawks are interviewing and are linked to, that they're from the Monty Kiffin tree, should not be surprising.
Yeah. And so there's variances though between like 3-4s and 4-3s, and Pete runs some sort of a hybrid in between. I understand that Sean Desai ran a 3-4 in Chicago this last season. Explain a little bit about how those fronts are different and why they would be different under the same sort of tree, and on the back end too. Maybe go into explaining the difference between a single high safety, a two high safety look, and a cover 3 and all that stuff.
So because of the way the Seahawks run now, the Seahawks hybrid system has shifted away from being a just major hybrid that it was early on, and it's gone a little more generic, more in more recent seasons. But when Pete Carroll first came in, right, I mean, you got a 340-pound defensive tackle moved outside to play defensive end at the 5-tech, and then you got a super undersized guy in Chris Clemens rushing off the edge at the Leo. What that essentially is a 3-4 front, but with one of the outside linebackers has their hand on the ground, and everything's kind of just shifted a little bit. But it really runs in that same way. The difference between what they were doing and what you see by the 3-4 defenses now is that only Mebane and Red Bryant in Seattle system were asked to 2-gap, which means basically you stack the whoever's blocking you stack them up, keep them square, and then you read the running back. And if he goes to your right, you shed the block and step into that hole. And if he runs to your left, you do it the other direction, and you're in charge of both gaps. The Seahawks had 2 guys that they trusted to 2-gap, and everyone else had a single gap assignment. Now, in a traditional 3-4, all 3 of your defensive linemen 2-gap. And in Seattle, it was just 2. The 3-tech didn't. And more recently, they've gone completely away from 2-gapping at all. And they've also gone away from the 330-pound defensive end. Credit Michael Bennett for getting the Seahawks to get away from that and adapt to a more conventional defensive end system. I think what we could see is the Seahawks going to a situation where they do more of that weirdness, and they move people around, and they get.
Do we have the personnel to do that?
I think we kind of do. I mean, you look at all of the 5 techs that they've got on the roster with Collier and
they'd have to make a decision on Green for sure.
Yeah, if they bring Green back, I mean, you've got oversized defensive ends that can come up and do it. You've got
Darrell Taylor.
Yeah, Darrell Taylor's pretty big. Those guys, but they can also play that outside linebacker and rush upfield. I think what they're missing is linebackers. They're gonna you need more bodies, because what you've got is you're currently on the roster would be your 2 interior linebackers with Wagner and Brooks, and you might be able to use Cody Barton on the weak side, the non overly aggressive pass rushing side of the 3-4, but you need that, you need that guy. And then, you just, they don't have any depth. And one thing that I like about the 3-4 is simply the fact that you have more linebackers on your roster and less defensive linemen, which means you have more guys that can play special teams
and more speed.
The last thing you want is 330-pound defensive tackles playing special teams and lumbering down the field. That, while entertaining, is not good football. Okay, so you also asked about the back end. So the Seahawks have played under Pete Carroll cover 3, which means you split the field into thirds. You have the safety in the middle, and you have the 2 cornerbacks on the outside. And as long as the cornerbacks stay deep and don't get beat deep, it works fairly well, because you got 3 guys back there. You split the field into thirds, and you
play everything underneath.
Yeah. And when it worked at its best, you had Earl Thomas back there, so the cornerbacks could be aggressive and know that if something bad happened to them, you've got the fastest safety in the NFL back there covering a lot of ground, and saying that he only has to cover a third of the field is a joke, because he's got speed to cover almost sideline to sideline. And it works. If you go to more of a cover 2, which is a lot of the different names that Pete Carroll's being linked to this offseason, it involves having 2 deep safeties. And so you split the field in half instead of thirds. So you're asking your safeties to cover a little more ground, but you're also not asking your cornerbacks to stay deep. You have your cornerbacks come up, and they actually have outside the numbers in the flat, like that's their zone area. And so it creates a couple of different places where there's holes. I mean, there's holes in any zone scheme. The big one is right down the middle, because you've got to get right. If your safeties are both widening to cover those outsides, you got a big hole in the middle, and you need a middle linebacker who can really run to get back and get deep, because they're the ones that end up responsible for that, for the middle of the field, and to stop those. And
your corners need to be good tackling corners, and your linebackers need to be pretty athletic, because you're usually taking your strong safety off the field when you're playing a too high look.
Yeah, you don't typically run what we would consider a traditional strong safety. You don't run a Cam Chancellor style guy out there who's up near the line of scrimmage and doing stuff. You want 2 guys that can play the deep part, really cover a lot of ground, cover well, all of that. And you want corners that are physical, that can jam guys at the line of scrimmage, that tackle really well, because they're up at the line of scrimmage. They're not running away, running down the field with wide receivers anymore. So there's a lot of different things that you need that are different than what Seattle has been acquiring.
Yes.
But in order for Seattle's defense to work well, you got to have Earl Thomas back there, and they don't.
I know.
I mean, Quandre Diggs has been great. He's been a Pro Bowler, but you could see that the defense doesn't work as well with him, even playing at a Pro Bowl level, as it did with Earl Thomas.
Yeah, we're doing another show for another show, and we're talking about defensive backs coming up, and
doing another show for another show.
Doing another show for another show, and it's on defensive backs, and so I was looking for safeties that would fit in Seattle's scheme, and there are a few. In fact, it's a pretty deep. It's a pretty deep year to have a corner or safety need and have it filled in the draft through probably rounds 4 or 5. Like you're going to get a player that's going to be able to help you.
3, 4, and 5, I think, are pretty deep rounds in there. You got to be careful, because
to fall in love with a tester at the combine that's going to light your socks off.
Just because a free safety has a lot of speed doesn't make them Earl Thomas, right? We've seen that, right? Tedrick Thompson was an absolute freaking disaster.
Yeah. Well, we kind of have one on our roster, and I don't like to disparage guys that are currently on our roster, but we have a guy that's was on our practice squad, used to play for the Vegas Raiders, and then is hung around our practice squad and just got a futures deal. Tanner Muse was a guy that was just coveted coming out of college. He had a great little college career. He was just one of those names that, and then the Raiders moved him to linebacker. Now, I don't know if that's his natural position because, or if he intends to move back to some sort of a strong safety position, but he was always a guy that I thought would have been a great safety in the NFL because he had the speed, he had the tackling ability, he could cover guys, and it just didn't work out for him. I don't know if he landed in the wrong spot or whatever, but you're right. Like for me, I think that the big thing is the tape, with these guys and the college guys. How does it translate? And some of that stuff you just immediately see.
It's really hard to project college defensive backs for Seattle right now because we don't know what system they're going to run. That's
true.
Because what you need if you're playing cover 3 is very different than what you need if you're playing cover 2. And that is, we kind of have to wait and see.
Well, with the single high stuff, you that's the guy. I mean, he's got to be super athletic, super fast, a sure tackler, all that kind of stuff, kind of the quarterback, a smart guy that knows the defense and everyone else's, responsibilities and stuff. With a second guy or a tandem, it seems like you could maybe find that guy a little bit later in the draft. And for single high guy, you want that guy, the primo guy that's going to be like in the first or top of the second round.
Yeah. Earl Thomas was picked in the top 10. So, or where was it, like 12? Or he was up there. I know he was the second first round pick that year. But yeah, I mean, in a cover 2, what you need,
or a hybrid guy might even work.
Yeah,
but the guy that can play both strong and free safety that kind of moves around a lot. Maybe a guy like Jamal Adams, for example,
maybe
might
he's
be the second.
He is not a guy.
He's way better up at the line of scrimmage.
He's not a guy you want deep. I was thinking, if you're going to run a cover 2, the lynch you were talking about. If you're running a cover 3, the linchpin is the free safety. If you want to cover 2, the linchpin's your middle linebacker.
Yeah, because he has to drop back and cover the middle of the field.
Yeah, they got to get back. They got to cover a lot of ground in the middle of the field. And
so let me ask you this:
also being a tackling machine up against the run.
I know. So Bobby Wagner is awesome 3 years ago for that spot. But what will you do now going into
Jordan
the future?
Brooks. If you're going to switch to a cover 2, you stick Jordan Brooks in that role, and you just do. He's that guy. He's got the speed to do it. He's got the athleticism to do it. He's going to be that guy. That doesn't mean you don't keep Bobby Wagner around. You let him be your weak side linebacker and have a zone.
I have my doubts that this exact conversation is going on with Pete Carroll and company trying to make a defensive coordinator decision. Maybe it is about moving Bobby Wagner around, or obviously the restructure ideas that we've been talking about, or like release or some sort of little trade or whatever. Lots of options, but your idea, no matter what, would be to keep him and just transition him to another spot.
Well, if you're moving to a cover 2 style, right? If you're moving to that being your one, Wagner is an amazing player, and he's super smart, and he's a great leader and all those things, but he doesn't have the speed he used to. Now he wins with smarts and that kind of stuff. And you need a guy who can cover the ground that Bobby Wagner used to be able to cover. And that's Jordan Brooks.
Yeah.
And so that's what I would do is I'd move him over to, one of the other linebacker spots where he's got a zone that's in between that giant middle of the field where the middle linebacker is going to go and the flat where the cornerbacks have.
I do trust Jordan Brooks a heck of a lot more today than I did in September.
Yeah.
I think that he can do that job. Is he going to be as good as Bobby Wagner was 3 or 4 years ago in Bobby's prime? He's probably not quite at that level, right? Because nobody is, but he's got the same sort of speed and instincts.
Bobby Wagner's what a 7-time All-Pro. He's a first ballot Hall of Famer. Comparing anyone to Bobby Wagner in their prime is so unfair.
I think that your idea though of moving Jordan Brooks in the middle and having Bobby Wagner still on the defense but on the outside is interesting. I think that's an interesting idea. But that would make that transition really be smooth for Jordan Brooks, because that's a lot to put on his plate. And if Wagner's gone, not only have you become the leader of the defense, your assignments have completely changed this year. Yeah. So that's a lot to expect for that third-year guy.
But think about the current Bobby Wagner, not the Bobby Wagner in his prime, who was
Bobby Wagner came into the league with like 4.46 speed, right? 4.46, 4.47.
It was like 4.42. It was like freaking elite for a linebacker.
So that's off the chain. So and now I would say he's probably 4.65 ish.
Yeah, maybe.
And but his instincts, right? His instincts are second to none. So that makes up for half of Bobby Wagner.
Take the current Bobby Wagner, not like I said, not in his prime, but the current one, and put him in the KJ Wright role of last year.
KJ Wright was never fast.
He was never fast, but he was always effective.
Yes.
His length and his instincts and his tackling ability.
Bobby Wagner's career.
Absolutely, it could. But you take Bobby Wagner and you put him in that KJ Wright role at the weak side linebacker and just let him be himself. Right. Find me the downside to this.
Well, there's two. One is, would Bobby Wagner take a role outside of middle linebacker for the Seattle Seahawks or any other team? And then two, then you're starting to talk about a different pay level for Bobby Wagner that needs to be commensurate with the expectations on the field.
Yes and no, because when you think, oh, will he take a job?
Short term, you could pay a guy 1 year to be Bobby Wagner on your team. You could live with that. And maybe that's all they're thinking. But if you're going to give him a 3-year deal and you're going to pay him $17 million, that doesn't make any sense to me.
No, you're not. But you're not going to pay him $17 million a year. You're going to pay him $12 million a year, and it's probably still overpaying him for that role. But you got Jordan Brooks on a rookie deal. So your combined salary for both of the guys is still less than you were paying Bobby Wagner and KJ Wright at the height of their tandem. So you're still paying less, and you just kind of, when it's time to pay Jordan Brooks.
Yeah, and by the time you get the 5th-year option on Jordan Brooks, you're probably done with Bobby.
Yeah. Bobby's probably hanging him up at that point. So I just think that you can make it work. I like that combination. I like keeping Bobby Wagner in town. That's the first time I've heard you talk
about that idea. I think that's pretty interesting.
Well, it's because I've been thinking a lot about what this team looks like if they have to play a 3-4. Not a 3-4, but also a cover 2. If you're going to go to a cover 2 instead of a cover 3, like, you've got to have that middle linebacker who can really cover ground, and they've got that. And it isn't Bobby Wagner anymore. It's Jordan Brooks. I mean, the prototypical cover 2 middle linebacker was Brian Urlacher. You remember him in Chicago?
Absolutely.
One of the best ever do it. And he could just run. I mean, he had absolute elite speed
and instincts.
Yeah,
that were second to none. Right.
The same way that Bobby Wagner did. Yeah. And I think that when Wagner was younger, if they had played him in that role, right, it wouldn't have slowed down his ability to win All Pro,
right.
Awards. In fact, it might have made it easier on him to win All Pro awards. But he was fantastic in any role, and I just think that you look at that. If that's the prototype. Who's closer to that prototype right now? It's not Wagner. It's Brooks. That's why I think he's the guy. That you got to put
fun conversation. Fun conversation to get the new defensive coordinator in the same room with Bobby and Jordan and have that conversation and see what happens.
Yeah,
because Bobby may want to not move. He may say that I'm still the guy. I'm still the guy.
If he leaves Seattle and goes to another team, that team is not going to stick him in the middle just because he's Bobby Wagner. They're going to look at what can he do right now and go, where do we put him? Where do we put him at best?
Yeah, I almost virtually guarantee that Bobby Wagner would have that conversation and choose a team that's going to keep him where he feels comfortable. He's not going to be going to a team at their whim, is going to move him around the defense or bring him off the bench or whatever and still pay him. I mean, Bobby Wagner wants to play and he's going to play at a high level. And I would say that he wouldn't go to a team that was going
to move him.
I don't think so. And maybe that makes a difference in Seattle, where they're asking him to take a little pay cut and restructure and move to a new position. And that conversation gets kind of screwy when you're talking about egos and stuff. And I don't know Bobby's ego
but the other thing that you could do in that is, hey, look, we're not paying you $20 million to play this year. So you can go play somewhere else for whatever you get on the market, or you can play for us for 12. And we're going to move you to weak side linebacker, and we're going to extend your career by 3 years.
Yeah, that's an interesting conversation.
We're going to give you 3 more years as a player that you wouldn't have if you stayed in the middle.
All right. I'd like to have that conversation again.
Yeah.
Around the time we talk about Bobby Wagner's free agency situation, the trades, markets, and all that stuff here in another couple weeks. Because that conversation could make this defense better without having to move, without having to acquire a player.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious about that. Just
makes the defense better, and especially if you can get Wagner to sign a 2-year extension at a much lower cap number, you made the defense better without acquiring.
That would be a magician move by John Schneider,
and you gain cap space.
Yeah, and this is why they need to hire you, Keith. You've just figured out that you've saved them money. You've made them better. This could be a Super Bowl move right there.
Hey, you know what, John? If you're interested, email me. If you're listening, I'm all ears. So feel free.
So this is the kind of conversation. This is the kind of direction that the show takes when we go into the show with literally no notes and we have nothing to talk about and we just push record. This is what we get. So
this is what happens. I know, because they're going to have something. We're going to know who at least the last 2 or 3 candidates. And we're going to have everything narrowed down for the defensive coordinator job. And it's not decided at all.
Yeah. No movement whatsoever in 10 days is kind of unique in the NFL. And,
it's unexpected, but you know what? We're here. So
we'll try it again next week.
We will.
Okay. So follow Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. I'm at NW Seahawk. The show is at Hawks Playbook. SeahawksPlaybook.com has all of this stuff. You can find us on your favorite podcast platform. And I'm not kidding, your favorite, like any of them. And then a YouTube channel. Subscribe. So that's it. So until next time.
Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.